question of no-fly zones. So, General Silva, your testimony is that the United States has the military capability to impose a no-fly zone over Syria.
Yes, sir.
A little over 2 weeks ago, Turkey shot down a Russian aircraft for violating Turkish airspace. How many Russian aircrafts have violated Turkish airspace since that incident?
None that I know of.
Do you think we can infer a lesson from Vladimir Putin's conduct in the aftermath of that shoot-down, since he had repeatedly violated Turkish airspace beforehand?
I think I'd be very careful in inferring his decision process to that particular set of circumstances, because what the Russians have done as a consequence of that shoot-down is to beef up their integrated air defense. They brought surface-to-air missiles into their base in Latakia. They've installed surface-to-air missiles around Aleppo. They have worked with Syrian partners, and the Syrian partners now have their radars active, which they didn't have just a few weeks ago. So I think it is that set of consequences when we think about no-fly zones that we have to factor into our calculus. If a no-fly zone is to be defended and it is to have effect on the ground, the consequences of activity by surface-to-air missile systems and air defense aircraft have to be factored into the equation. We have the capability to deal with those. The consequence is a direct confrontation with Russia or Syria.
Thank you. Secretary Carter, I noticed that you were smirking at my question. Could I get your take on that?
No, I'm sorry. I was smiling at General's
I think it might deserve a smirk.
Correctly, that it's hard to know. I was
rebuking you.
No. I was smiling about inferring Vladimir Putin's intentions. He rightly said it. It's a little hard to know. That's all. I was just.
Well, I would submit that he repeatedly violated Turkish airspace until Turkey defended its airspace, and he has not done so since then, and that maybe we can learn a lesson from that. I also want to return to the point that Senator Ayotte was discussing about the oil trucks that we struck shortly after the Paris attacks. I believe it was a little over 100. Can you explain why that didn't happen earlier? I mean, why that didn't happen 6 months ago, a year ago?
There are two principal reasons. First is the development of the actual intelligence as to the contribution of those particular routes to the finances of ISIL. With respect to the chairman, those are that black and gray economy in oil across the region.
So I understand that. I understand that intelligence can often be hard to develop, especially when you don't have a presence on the ground, but I don't understand what's hard to develop intelligence about tanker trucks leaving refineries in ISIS-controlled space.
The second point, Senator, is that in an effort to minimize the civilian casualties, the drivers of those trucks are not necessarily adherents to ISIL's ideology, but are Syrians trying to make.
I have no doubt about that. They're probably Syrians who are driving trucks, and Islamic State said, drive this truck or we're going to kill you and cut the heads off your kids.
So I actually visited with the unit that prosecuted the attacks on the bulk of those vehicles. And they used a set of tactics, techniques, and procedures that warned the drivers in advance so they could flee their trucks, and then destroyed the trucks in situ. We're looking for more opportunities to do exactly the same thing so that we don't alienate the civilian population, those that are not ISIL adherents, and continue to degrade the infrastructure for production.
And I strongly support that, and I'm aware of the TTPs you're discussing, but those are things that our Air Force have done for a long time to minimize civilian casualties. We didn't just develop these TTPs in the last month, did we? I mean, we could leaflet civilians 6 months ago or 12 months ago, right?
They are not new TTPs, but the opportunities and the places with which to use them are a product of the intelligence that we developed from our understanding of the oil infrastructure and distribution network that supports it.
I'd like to talk about now the Rules of Engagement Decision-Making Authority. One constant thing I've heard from senior commanders down to low-level troops in my travels in the region and here in the United States is that decisions that were being made in the middle part of the last decade by O5s are now being made by 3- and 4-star generals or even civilians in Washington, and that the rules of engagement have been incredibly restrictive, as is the example, this oil tanker truck example. Secretary Carter, do you care to comment on what I've been hearing from troops directly on my trips and visits?
I'll start, and then I do want General Selva to represent professional military judgment in this matter, so I'd like him give him the opportunity to speak as well. The commanders there, the air commanders, have told me, and I'll let General Selva and General Dunford have reported to me about limitations on the effectiveness of the air campaign, and I have asked about whether our rules of engagement are a limiting factor that is stopping them from being more effective. And just two things I'd say about that, and then I'll let General Silva go into more detail. They have not changed over time. And by the way, these are not things that are approved in Washington or anything. These are things that are done by the air operators in theater, which is appropriate. The things that have really enabled our air, well, let me turn it around and say the things that have limited it from time to time our air campaign have been, first of all, annoyingly weather. And that was true a month and a half ago for a couple of weeks. But then and that's important, more fundamentally has been intelligence. And we've gotten a lot better intelligence picture now, and therefore able to conduct more effective strikes, which is one reason why we're able to conduct more strikes, absorb more air capability because we could get into Incirlik, from which the sorties were shorter, absorb more capability from the French and others and put it to good use because we could develop the targets. And I always say it's better to have more airplanes than targets than airplanes. And so on some days, a sortie goes out for dynamic targeting as opposed to deliberate targeting. Deliberate targeting, the bombs are almost always dropped, more than 90%. Dynamic targeting is where you go out there and hope that a target that you're thinking might develop actually does develop. That's an important thing to do because it's what stops ISIL from being able to use the road safely, having to drive at night with their lights off, all that kind of stuff. And you don't always find those targets, and so sometimes the airplanes come back with the bombs on it. It's intelligence that makes all the difference. General, please.
Senator, I've met a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine who wouldn't ask for looser ROE in any active fight. But having consulted with the commanders, from the JTF all the way up to Central Command, I know of no rules of engagement restrictions that have prevented us from striking targets and that prevented our forces from being as effective as they can be on the ground. I've consulted with all of them.
Thank you. I'm over time, but Senator Reed, if I can have one moment to ask a more lighthearted question of General Silva. For 60 years, NORAD and the Air Force has been tracking Santa over the skies of North America. Can you assure the boys and girls of this country that NORAD and the Air Force is fully prepared to track Santa once again?
I don't have a complete intelligence report, Senator, but I understand that the reindeer have been, in fact, fed their quantity of oats and are prepared for the delivery of all of those gifts to those who have been nice and not naughty.
Well, I think it's a welcome reminder that while most Americans are at home enjoying Christmas with their families, that our airmen, soldiers, sailors, and Marines, whether they're in NORAD or around the world, are out there keeping us safe and defending our values and what makes this country great.
Sir, not to extend the questioning and the answering, but I did spend my Thanksgiving with our troops in Iraq, in Baghdad, Taji, and Erbil, and I can report to you that their morale is high, and they did phone home and talk to the people who love them.
Okay. Thank you very much for reminding